We are still expecting a multi-day severe weather outbreak to traverse the United States, bringing widespread severe weather and the potential for some damaging winds, a blizzard, and potentially some fire danger for Nebraska going into Kansas, also all the way down into Texas, a large area where fires will definitely be possible, where our blizzards will mainly be located up here near North and South Dakota, where these pressure gradients are a little bit tighter. But the main thing that we're watching out for coming in the short term and the long term is going to be first our little prefrontal shortwave, or I guess you could just call it a appetizer before our main storm, the main course. It'll be this guy, which is expected to scrape some moisture out in front of the atmosphere, but trends have been showing this thing getting a little weaker over time, meaning we might have just a little bit more moisture with our next storm, which is pretty much going to be the main subject of this video, which is going to be this low pressure up here. It's going to come through the United States, first bringing some severe weather up here into the central, kind of eastern portions of the United States. That moves through, and then another storm after that we're going to be talking about, and then eventually this storm moves to the East Coast. We're going to be talking about all of that in today's forecast. Before we get started though, folks, make sure you are sharing this video to your friends and family. You never know who might want to see a forecast or is curious about what's coming down the line in terms of severe weather. First on our list of severe weather events is going to be the event for today. As you can see, we do have a slight risk out there today over parts of Oklahoma going into Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana, with a marginal risk around that. Our tornado threat is going to be a 2% for tornadoes, so nothing super elevated, just something to keep an eye on as the storm comes through. Chances are you'll probably just see some storms with some lightning and some rain, and every now and then see some potential, especially over here in this yellow region, for some large to very large hail of up to 2 inches and above, which for reference is pretty much like a hen egg falling out of the sky at around 50 miles per hour. So if you have any expensive vehicles outside of your house or pets that like to sit outside as well, make sure you're bringing them inside before these storms come through if you are put under a severe thunderstorm warning. Now moving on over to our wind risk, we also have a 15% chance for some 60-mile-per-hour winds in this yellow area with a 5% in the green area. So overall, this day is a day where you're definitely going to want to keep an eye on things. But by no means is it going to be as potent of a day as some of these days to come. And coming down into this region and looking at our HRRR model and pushing this all the way into where we're expecting these storms to fire, this is going to be around tonight at around 6 p.m. You can see that by the time we get there, we do have a couple of storms trying to fire. So it's going to be kind of near the Dallas area and the Fort Worth area, and another storm could potentially, or a cluster of storms could potentially fire down here into the southeast portion of Oklahoma. As we move into about 8 to 9 p.m., you see we get kind of this cluster of thunderstorms that should move through that slight risk and have some potential there to produce some very large hail, damaging winds, and a small chance for a tornado. But as we get into later portions of the night, the instability should start to drop off, and this should mainly just turn into a cluster of showers and some gusty winds as we move into northern Louisiana and parts of Arkansas, before it eventually falls apart as we go throughout the early morning hours at around 3 a.m. as this little wave moves into parts of Louisiana and Mississippi. As this wave moves into the southeast the next day, as we get some more daylight heating, we could see a reinvigoration of some of these storms as they ride this little subtle boundary of cooling that is going to be just enough to provide a little bit of lift for some thunderstorms, and some of these every now and then might gain the ability to become severe. And as you can see over here in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia and Florida tomorrow, there is a small chance for severe weather. You guys are under a marginal risk down there, so just keep your eyes out for some storms tomorrow if you live in these areas and you have outdoor plans. After these storms move in, we are going to be watching out for a low pressure system to come through the United States. As you can see, we're talking about a 974 here on the NAM model. And if you look at some of our other models, Canadian model has a 980, which is still a pretty potent low pressure system. The Euro has a 977, which is also still pretty potent. The GFS has a 975, which is definitely a very potent low pressure system. Icon has a 979. But if we go through these models, you can see that there is still a little bit of jumping around on where they think this low pressure system will be at around this time. So there's still a little bit of uncertainty. The Euro model is lagging behind a little bit from some of our other models. The GFS is definitely a more progressive wave, so it will be moving faster. And the NAM model is a little bit slower actually than the Euro model. As you can see, it's a little bit further back behind. So we got got more of a progressive wave with the GFS, and the NAM and the Euro model are lagging behind a little bit. Overall, with these low pressure systems, the stronger they are, the better chance they're going to have at bringing in some extra moisture, instability, and a stronger shear environment. So let's go check out those things and figure out if anything has changed since the last time we looked at these storms. So first of all, looking at our day 3 risk here, this is going to be the day after tomorrow. You can see that we do have a little bit of a larger of an enhanced risk. That's going to be for parts of Iowa going into Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, even into Alabama on Friday, and then also northern to central Mississippi, Arkansas, and parts of Missouri. This is most likely going to be for damaging winds up here to the north and potentially a strong tornado risk a little bit further to the south, as long as the models still continue to hold on their current solutions. But also some pretty damaging winds will be possible even further south as well. We also have a slight risk that's a 2 out of 5 for severe weather around this enhanced risk. That goes all the way from Minnesota down into southern central Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And then we have a marginal risk that extends all the way from Louisiana all the way up into parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. We do not have our specific categories on what we can expect in terms of damaging winds and tornadoes, but we do already have a pretty large area where we have a hatched risk region. That means a region that we are expecting some significant severe weather to be possible. That includes winds like over 75 miles per hour, strong tornadoes, and potentially hail up to the size of 2 inches. And coming back over to our models to kind of give this storm a diagnosis on what is possible here, as the storm ejects into the United States, we're going to be watching for where our forcing is. We do that by looking at the 300 millibars, and again, this is basically like a void that forms forcing storms to convect, or another way to think about it is like if someone breaks up with you, you get a void in your heart, and you fill that void with ice cream. And you can think of the storms as the ice cream and the void as the spreading apart here of our wind vectors. And according to the NAM, most of our forcing is going to be anywhere from parts of Iowa down through Illinois, going into Kentucky and into northern Tennessee, with some subtle and more weaker forcing down here to the south. Our GFS is a little bit more progressive at this time, but it basically has the forcing in a pretty similar area. Euro model is a little bit wonky here. You can see it kind of has a little bit more of a split flow here, with our main forcing being a little bit further up to the north, which is interesting given the fact that for a while the Euro has been one of our more southerly models, at least in some of our previous forecasts that seem to be the case. And another thing that I'm noticing here is you see this little circle here within this little kind of bulge out of the 894 line here. The Euro is really the only one here with a closed low. The GFS has a little bit of a closed low there, and the NAM also has a closed low. But as you can see, a little bit of a less organized look to our low pressure system, and that might be some of the reason why we are seeing our forcing kind of end up in different areas. So overall, though, it does seem like the models are converging on there being enough forcing, especially up here in the northern side with some weaker forcing down here to the south. Now we're going to try to talk about spin. Spin is important for tornadoes to happen. In order to figure that out, you have to be looking at the lower level winds and upper level winds and seeing how they are oriented towards each other. So the NAM model has this low pressure system ejecting into this area, and you can really see that right around in this streak, we have anywhere from 80 to 100 knots of upper level shear. That is extremely powerful upper level shear. So if we have 800 bar winds to go with that, we're going to have a lot of spin in the atmosphere. This is the NAM solution. You can see that streak is mainly over Texas, Arkansas, and Missouri. GFS is very similar, and so is the Euro. So it really does seem like right in this area is where we're going to have our strongest upper level winds. Now, when you combine that with our lower level winds, which is what we're looking at right now, you can see that on the GFS, the NAM, and the Euro, the upper level winds are going generally in this direction. But on the NAM, GFS, and Euro here, you can see that our winds are generally coming out of the south to the north. So pretty much anywhere where these storms can mature due to the forcing, the winds are going to be more perpendicular in relation to the initiating boundary. That mixed with some dry air aloft could mean that we could potentially see some more discrete cells in the southern mode if we can get them to fire. And further up to the north, where things are more parallel, we're probably going to see more of a linear line capable of some damaging winds for sure, as we have so much wind shear up here above our heads. Any sort of precipitation that can bring that down to the surface will definitely cause some pretty gusty winds, potentially significant winds of up to 75 miles per hour and greater, especially on the northern side of where some of this convection happens. You can see the NAM has our main area of stronger lower level winds in this area near Mississippi, Missouri, going up into Illinois. GFS Kind of the same thing, a little bit more to the north, though, on our highest areas of lower level wind shear. And same here with the Euro model. So subtle differences, but overall, all kind of saying the same thing here, which is we're going to have upper level shear. We're going to have that forcing for mature storms. We're going to have our lower level shear working with our upper level shear to produce spin. Now, just because you have forcing doesn't mean you're going to have mature storms last for really that long at all, or sometimes not even able to get there if we can't get that instability. That instability. Instability. But anyways, as you can see on our NAM model here, our instability is quite low, especially down here in our southern mode with 1,000 joules per kilogram only reaching up into parts of Arkansas. There is technically enough instability to support some tornado threat further up to the north due to the high amounts of wind shear that we're going to have, so definitely a chance that our storm could be a little bit more linear with less prefrontals up here to the north, with maybe still enough skinny little area here of instability to still produce some QLCS tornadoes. Our GFS, however, has a little bit further north of its instability, going all the way up into Arkansas and Missouri, which is actually a little bit of an uptrend since the last time we looked at these models. So definitely got to keep an eye on this trend and see where it goes as we get a little bit closer. Because again, the further north that this instability can make severe weather, the higher chance that we're going to be able to see some stronger tornadoes, as that's where a lot of our most dangerous shear values are. One of the things I'm also noticing here on the GFS is that this is a little bit of a skinny cape profile, so those prefrontals out in front of a line of storms are going to be pretty rare, but along the line of storms, we could have a broken line of supercells and semi-discrete supercells here further to the south. So it's definitely something we need to watch out for. But as you can see, there are still big differences here in how much moisture and instability that we have. If this were to happen, it would definitely be a lower chance for stronger tornadoes further to the south, with some more briefer and weaker tornadoes possible along the linear line that extends up to the north. So we still got some pretty big differences on what we can expect in terms of our caliber of severe weather for the 4th. Sorry. I don't know why I said the 4th. I was thinking day 4, but for the 14th, sorry. And the last thing I want to talk about here, at least for the 14th, is our capping inversion. We got to be watching where we're going to be seeing some capping with these storms. The NAM is actually throwing a little bit of a wrench into this forecast, although the NAM is the only model that's really showing this right now, so we'll have to see what the HRRR says. But it has a little bit more of a capping version further to the south, which is essentially like a bottle cap that's going to be keeping storms from being able to mature. The GFS, however, you can really see it really doesn't have much of a cap in that area where the storms could form, so it is pretty interesting. Also, looking at the Euro, you can see that maybe it's kind of like in the middle ground of both of these models. Maybe a little bit of capping there, but not too bad to where storms can't mature eventually. Now, you mix all of that together, you eventually get some storms to fire, and as you can see, as we move into about 1 p.m. To around 7 p.m., that's when we're expecting this northern mode to fire. Keep in mind, we're looking at the NAM right now, so we're not going to see as much convection further to the south. But I do want to say that this is certainly a scenario where we just really don't get much storms to fire down here. If a capping inversion does build in on some of our short-range models, that is going to become a little bit more of a possibility. We're still, unfortunately, not in the range of our high-resolution models. But as this moves off to the north and east throughout the nighttime, we're going to expect this Boeing segment of some damaging winds, potentially up to 75 to 80 mile per hour winds, move through most of Illinois and then eventually start to move into Indiana and parts of Michigan as we get into around 1 a.m. As the storm progresses, still windy up there in the Ohio Valley, but then our focus shifts to day 5. Sorry, I meant to say the day 4, but this is going to be the 15th. And as you can see, we still have an enhanced risk down here, a little bit fatter than it was yesterday, for parts of Louisiana going into most of Mississippi, all of Alabama, and nosing into parts of Georgia, southern Tennessee, and a little tiny portion there of North Carolina, with a slight risk around that extending all the way from the Gulf Coast up into northern Ohio and parts of Pennsylvania. Now, I will say, just on a synoptic perspective here of this storm, it is starting to seem a little bit more favorable than on Friday. Some of our models are continuing to trend a little bit more favorable for this storm as it moves into the southeast for maybe a little bit more of a compact but more organized chances for severe weather and tornadoes. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. If we come over here to the 300 millibar winds, you can see that as this trough, this little short wave, tries to move into this area, you can see that we start to develop a pretty obvious area of forcing anywhere from northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, going into Tennessee and Kentucky. So we are going to have that forcing there, that void that you fill with ice cream. The ice cream is the storms, forcing them to mature. You can see that we do have some decent forcing here. So mature storms are definitely going to be possible in that region. Moving over to our 500 millibar winds, you can see that we definitely have a potent upper level jet with our winds moving out of the southwest, moving up to the northeast, so moving generally in this direction. And then in our lower levels, you can see those winds are more south to north here. So we definitely got some perpendicularity. We definitely got some really strong lower level winds and upper level winds in this area, especially for northern Mississippi going into northern Alabama, Tennessee. Not so much there in Kentucky unless we push this forward. Maybe overnight as we move into 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., we could be seeing a pretty intense damaging wind event up here into Tennessee, Kentucky, going up into West Virginia. You definitely can't rule out some tornadoes with that. But our kind of peak of our event is going to be down here throughout the day as we move into around 4 p.m. here on the 15th. So we got some forcing for some mature storms that lower and upper level shear. Looking at our instability starting at around 9 a.m., we definitely have a lot more available instability with this storm, as that instability can be all the way from Louisiana going up into the Ohio Valley. But it's that main area where our convection is going to be happening is a little bit further to the south, so we're not really expecting severe storms further up there, but a small chance will still exist. That's why we have a slight risk up there. So there's definitely still some possibilities up here for some damaging winds and maybe a small chance for tornadoes. But as we move throughout the day and that jet strengthens, we still have a pretty decent area here, a pretty wide warm sector out in front of this line of storms. I'm going to be honest, this day is starting to look a little bit more concerning to me than Saturday, especially since we have such available instability where a lot of our strongest forcing and some of our stronger lower level and upper level winds are. This is what you look out for. When all these things line up, that's when you start to get a little bit more concerned about event. And this one's definitely piquing my interest, because with this amount of instability, we are definitely going to be able to get sustained storms, potentially even supercells, more discrete supercells, and potentially a little bit more of a rapid fire tornado threat. So we definitely got to keep an eye on this storm and on the models as we go throughout the future. Looking at the Euro, however, the Euro model is trying to throw a wrench into this day. It's kind of hard to tell which one of these models are going to end up being correct, but you can see on the Euro model that instability is way far down to the south here. So the main thing that we're going to be watching over the next couple of days is which one of these models caves to each other. Does the GFS start to bring that moisture down to the south and cave to the Euro? That would mean a lot less of a serious severe weather threat as we move into the 15th. So this is going to be one of the main things that we're going to be watching here, because this is one of our biggest discrepancies between the models. Will these storms have food in order to sustain themselves for long enough to mature and tap into that spin environment? But you mix that all together and we should start to see some storms potentially fire as early as around 1 p.m. out in front of this storm near the warm frontal boundary, and then we'll see a more organized area of the potential prefrontal cells eventually transitioning more into a linear line as the line moves into eastern Alabama going into Georgia by around 10 p.m. So again, potentially another day with a higher ceiling here that we're going to have to keep an eye on, but there's still some details to work out. So I do think this forecast will change over time. And as we continue to push this into Sunday, by around 10 a.m., you can see we still have some storms firing over here near Pennsylvania, going all the way down into Florida. This is going to be our day 5 risk, or on the 16th here, we have a slight risk all the way from Florida up through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, parts of West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So a lot of folks are going to have to be watching out for this. I really do think it's going to be kind of similar to the last day that came through, but there might be a little bit higher of a chance for some spin-up tornadoes, and I'll tell you why. As the storm moves off to the east and eventually starts to butt up against the east coast, you can see right out in front of the storm, it does try to get that instability going. Now, this didn't really happen last time we had a line of storms come through. So this is going to be one of the things that we're going to have to keep an eye on to see where those trends go. If we get a little bit more instability, then we're probably going to have a little bit more of a potent severe weather event. I think regardless, we could be seeing some potentially significant damaging winds as this moves into this area, but a lot of things have to be monitored as this day is a little bit further out than the other days we've talked about. So this forecast could change the most, but overall, does seem like some instability could work into there, and a little bit of spreading with our wind vectors over here, especially in North Carolina and Virginia. Our upper level winds are definitely still strong. Our lower level winds are definitely still strong, although our wind vectors are a little bit more parallel, so we're definitely going to see more of a linear style line with this, less discrete cells. But overall, as this line moves throughout the area, there will be a tornado risk associated with it as it moves into parts of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and also over here near New Jersey, potentially even making it up into Long Island and Connecticut. So definitely a storm to keep an eye on. A lot of things are going to change, but it does seem like all the ingredients are there for yet another day of elevated severe weather here for the East Coast. The last thing I want to talk about for this storm is going to be those winds. This is going to be important to talk about here, especially as we move into the 14th early morning, you can see that we do have some areas of 79-mile-per-hour wind gusts. That's over hurricane force winds possible down here in Texas, with some 40 to 60-mile-per-hour winds possible over here near New Mexico. Now, this is pretty interesting here because when we look at our relative humidity, it is certainly going to be pretty dry behind this storm, especially as we move into 1 p.m. You're going to have those strong winds and these dry conditions, and that's going to be setting up for a fire risk. That's why we were talking about those red flag warnings earlier in the video. They're all widespread throughout pretty much anywhere that we see this dryness and these winds coexist. And you can still see by the time the atmosphere really starts to dry out, we still have some pretty strong winds going into Texas here. So definitely want to watch out as we go into the early morning on the 14th for not only the chances for some power outages, but also for chances for some fires as this wind and dry air moves into the area. Eventually, with this first little wave here, we're going to be seeing widespread 40 to 50 mile per hour winds as we move throughout the evening at around 7 p.m. Out in front of our line, associated with our line itself, there could be anywhere from 75 miles per hour and above, but out in front, we could still easily see, those 40, 50, maybe even some isolated wind gusts of up to 60 miles per hour due to the gradient winds with this storm. And eventually, as we move into 10 p.m., those stronger winds start to move into Indiana and Ohio. As we move into 4 a.m., you can see they kind of die down a little bit, but still with some pretty hefty winds over here in the Ohio Valley, and also back over here in South and North Dakota and Nebraska, where we are expecting some brief blizzard conditions. That's going to be around 4 a.m. And then eventually, we start to see our southern mode of storms the next day as we go into the 15th at around 4 p.m. We're going to see another pretty damaging wind event here with anywhere from 60 to 71 mile per hour winds possible in northern Alabama going into Tennessee, southern Kentucky, and that eventually will spread into areas like Ohio, parts of West Virginia, and also into western Virginia. That's a little bit confusing, but West Virginia and Western Virginia, two different states there. And then eventually that pushes off to the east with widespread 50 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts in and along that line of storms. And then look over here near Long Island, potentially anywhere from 40 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts could be possible as this ejects off of the coast. And then by the time we get into around 317, most of our impacts with this storm are over. Thank you guys so much to all of you who have watched this video. I do appreciate it very much. If you haven't already and you want to show some support, hit that like button if you did like the video, and subscribe and turn on post notifications if you want to see more of my forecast. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next video or live stream, which could potentially even be today. See you later.